Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
So, what is coordination, and what's the difference between coordination and conscious coordination? Because this is something Alexander talks about a lot in his books, and he has the funny spelling of coordination with a hyphen between co and ordination.
Yeah.
And a lot of modern Alexander people don't really talk about coordination very much. So, what do you think is going on? What's the difference?
Well, that's for sure. Most modern Alexander teachers are not using the word coordination, and even less the dreaded one, which is conscious coordination. And it's very important in our conception of learning to do. I started with this idea that Alexander is developing in the last book, in the Universal Constant in Living, where learning to do is not a simple matter. You have to realize that you start with, very uneven intellectual ideas about what is learning to do. And coordination is most of the time not part of that picture. Learning coordination is something that is not accepted nowadays by somatic people. They imagine that coordination results either from your makeup. Sometimes they would even use the word reflexes. They say that you can learn to stand in a different way. Or the other idea is that, if you're conscious of the moment, if you're in the moment, only good thing will happen. It's quite. I'm laughing because for me it's so funny, you know. If you ever use a video camera and film yourself into any sort of gesture, well, suddenly. It's absolutely obvious that the second option, that is being mindful, is going to make things happen for you in the way you want. If it's in the way you want, it's in the way you know. And I can't see how this could lead you to learning the unknown, which is not the opposite of what you habitually do when you coordinate different movements or different actions at the same time, because these different actions are happening, and it's like without you. I mean, it's happening to you. You say, I'm not doing these things. They happen. If you tell me that I'm moving my belly forward when I try to stand, I'm not even aware of it. Or some people will refuse to accept that they are doing it unless they see a recording of themselves where we can point to them that, yes, it's exactly what is happening. So we must gather from where you are, which is, I'm often thousands of kilometers away from the person, and the person is alone in the room, so that the person is ordering these movements. But the person has no conception that he or she is ordering these movements. These movements happen, which is the opposite to conscious guidance. It's absolutely subconscious guidance. So to start today, I have taken a little excerpt from the Universal Constant in Living, and Alexander took from a presidential address to, I think it's a South African chemist society. And it was a talk given by a gentleman called T.D. Hall, and it's entitled Some Accomplishment of the Chemist. And very curiously, this scientist, was at first opening his talk by showing how science had revolutionized human life. And then he abruptly started on a completely different tack, and where he mentioned Alexander. So I thought it was a quite interesting starting point for today's conversation. So that's Mr. Hall speaking. From what I have gathered from Alexander's writing, He had little hope of the world improving its condition until these fundamental wrongs are appreciated and corrected. When around the council tables of the nation sit men with slumped and shortened spine, contracted thoracic regions, crowded vitals, unhealthy paunches, with poor circulations and breathing wrongly, monuments to the instinctive, incorrect use of their bodies, and of which they are blissfully unaware, how can the world hope for any solution of its problems from such sources? And there is a little paragraph, he said, he further explains that the present physical exercise revival, which is an acknowledgement that something is seriously wrong with man, will not help matters because it is a case of the blind leading the blind. And that while these exercises will correct some physical faults, they will only accentuate others, as no exercise can benefit a body as a whole in which instinctive control is wrong and where there is a lack of proper coordination. I do think that this man all has it right. And I particularly like the end of his little paragraph, where he's saying that there is a lack of proper coordination. When he starts, he's describing, well, results. He's describing what we would call ends. That is shortened spine, contracted thoracic region, crowded vital and unhealthy paunches, breathing wrongly. All these things are just consequences of what we call coordination. And for Alexander, coordination had a very precise meaning. You have to go back 2 books before this one. You have to go back to Constructive Conscious Control of the Individual to read what Alexander talks about when he talks about coordination. Coordination has a special meaning for him. It's not the habitual fuzzy word that most people use. For Alexander, coordination is ordinarily used at the present time in as narrow and limited a sense as the word relaxation, readjustment, reeducation, etc. In view of this fact, I consider it necessary to give some idea of the more comprehensive sense in which it is used in this work. So, I use the word coordination both in its conception and its application to convey the idea of coordination on a general and not a specific basis. Specific coordination of any specific part of the organism, such as the muscles of the arm or leg, may be brought about by means of a direct process, during which process, however, new defects in the use of the organism in general will certainly be cultivated, whilst other, already present, will become more pronounced. These harmful conditions will not be cultivated if the specific coordination is brought about by means of an indirect process involving primarily the general coordination of the psychophysical organism, that is to say, an integrated condition in which all the factors continue to make for satisfactory psychomechanical use. This distinction between the specific and the general applies also to the term readjustment, reeducation, and relaxation, as I use them in this book. For in general reeducation, Specific defects are eradicated in process. Well, it may be necessary to stop a second and start, deciphering what Alexander is talking about. So there are two different usage of the word coordination. Alexander considered that there is all sorts of specific coordinations. So you want to change the movement of the hand, for example. In writing, he used that example. And you will try and have the person release the fingers. You will have to have the person, for example, command a movement of the finger and then say no. And then command the movement of the finger again and say no. And command the finger to move again and say no. And you will get a completely new sensory experience when in the end you give consent to moving the finger. This is an example that has been given to me by an Alexander teacher very recently about what he meant by inhibition. And the conception I have of inhibition is totally different. It's absolutely clear for me that what the teacher was talking about was a specific attempt at moving a part, that this coordination was absolutely limited, and it is not the comprehensive sense of the word coordination as given by Alexander or promoted by Alexander. And I explained to that person that in what I'm teaching, I am certainly asking the person to, for example, inhibit the direction of a specific movement. And while this is happening, I ask the person to reorganize or readjust the mechanism of the torso, the central part. And while readjusting the mechanism of the torso, the person then can give consent to moving the finger. And it's absolutely clear that the person will not have a very strong sensory experience of moving the finger in the different way, because the person's attention will be, in fact, spread onto all the orders that are used to redirect the mechanism of the torso. Therefore, there will be no specific feeling associated with moving the finger with that mental preparation. And so I consider that there is specific coordination, trying to coordinate something, and there is something else that is relating any readjustment of the extremities to the coordination of the movement of the different parts of the torso, which make for expanding the torso. The very simple definition I give of the technique is a technique where we use concept, where we use words and tools of the mind, which are rules, in order to obtain an expansion of the torso in every act, so that we coordinate any sort of gesture with the readjustment of the mechanism of the torso. And we do not evaluate that readjustment or the outcome of the act of general coordination by what we feel, ever. The point is we evaluate from memory, and we evaluate from the memory of the video recording we've seen of ourselves responding to these instructions. When Alexander used the word coordination, he talks about conception and application. You have maybe not thought about this. Why would there be a conception of the word and an application of the word? Well, many teachers nowadays consider that there is no application of the word coordination, because coordination should follow from either being aware or should follow from having the correct reflexes acting at some moment. So the teacher's work is somehow to remove what is hindering the good reflexes. And if the good reflexes are not hindered, then proper coordination would happen. Therefore, well, in this view of the technique, there is no application of the coordination. In the technique as I teach it, it's absolutely different. We consider that the pupil, without being aware of it, is always coordinated different actions when responding to a stimulus to action. You ask a person to sit down or to stand up, or you ask a person to take a step in walking, and you can, on film, on video recording, you can perfectly show what are the different directions of movement that the person is going consent to. So you can therefore conceive the coordination the person is performing in front of you. You can represent it. The conception is not that you create it. The conception is just intellectual. And from that act of conception, of representing what is happening, then you can come to an application, which is you can request the person to command in advance a coordination of completely different series of actions. You can ask the person to notice what are the movements that are habitually performed without any knowledge of the person, or sometimes the person knows. I've had some teachers telling me, I know I'm pulling the upper part of the chest back. Well, if you know that you're doing this, why are you still doing it? Well, because it's happening. I've had years and years of hands-on lessons, and it's still there, meaning that it's like part of me. And so this is where the conscious coordination concept starts with a refusal. We believe there is an application possible. We believe it's possible to refuse an habitual coordination. It's possible to start using mental tools in order to change the coordination. And so I have an example here. I've taken an example from a leader, and we see the person standing. This is the result of the coordination after going to stand. And so when we say we conceive a coordination, I've put arrows, to describe the posture. But not only does it describe the posture, but it gives an hint to the conception of the coordination that I can form out of looking at this person going from sitting to standing. What I can say is that this unduly lifted chest, which is really pulling the upper thoracic spine backward in space, backward relatively to what's happening to the middle torso, of course. The person is arching and is pulling the upper spine so far back that the neck is pulled back, and therefore, as you can see, the head is used very far back relatively to the middle torso. Well, this is not a description of the coordination. The coordination here is indicated by the arrows. I am indicating different movements. I suggest that to obtain that shape, from the moment the person was sitting to the moment the person was standing, the person was in fact giving consent to directing different bony parts of the anatomical structure in space. The person was clearly accelerating the upper part of the sternum backward much faster than the lower part of the sternum. Therefore, I can say that there is an antagonistic action between the lower sternum projected forward and the upper part of the sternum projected backward, and as you can see, downward. This is the conception of the orientation that Alexander calls unduly lifting the front part of the chest. And as Alexander describes, when you unduly lift the front part of the chest, you have the protruding shoulder blades at the back, you have the shortening of the back, and you have this attitude with the lower sacrum projected very far backward. Once we can decipher the activity of the pupil, this is subconscious activity. We want the person to start to, well, intervene in some ways, you know? A production of a coordination is refusing certain movements. You have to inhibit certain movements from happening. You have to promote other movements taking their place. And so we can ask, and so, for example, when I ask the person to perform another gesture. The gesture here is very simple. I said to the person, you know, to sit, you have to bring the sitting bone above the chair. It's as simple as this. If you do not bring the sitting bone above the chair, you're in danger. And I say to the person, well, to limit the difficulty, I'm going to ask you to set your palms against the wall so that we are sure you cannot fall forward. And I request the person to bend the knee in a new way. That is, for the person, suddenly, the person is to realize that every single time he was going to sit, every time, without change, ever, he was releasing the ankle so that his knees were moving forward to start the movement. There, he's starting the movement in a different way. He's starting the movement with the back of the knees still against the front of the chair. This totally unusual way of sitting will have, well, the advantage of slowing down how the person is going to start to sit. Because at first, when the person starts to want to sit in a so totally different way, refusing to release the ankle, refusing to move the knees forward, is absolutely difficult. But it has the advantage of showing without a doubt to that student that his habit of going to sit is systematically to release the extensors of the legs that are connected with the back. When the extensors of the back are disconnected, well, when the connection from the legs to the back is disconnected, there is a very familiar pattern that you will see. It is that the lower sacrum, which is the lower end of the spine, is going to be lifted backward. The person is not only arching the back from the top, the person is also arching the back from the lower part of the torso. And it's very important for the student to realize this. The student is not aware of anything he's doing with his pelvis when he's going to sit. Going to sit for him is just, well, a series of action. He knows one order, command, go to sit, and the person sits. Here, we see that by changing one aspect of the coordination, suddenly the person is more or less at a loss. At first, you would be surprised, but the person cannot go toward the chair. There is something that is not working as it should. There is no sensation according to the habitual sensory appreciation of that person. And therefore, well, this has a tendency to augment the defects, which is, for us, something very interesting, because that is a way for that person to become intellectually aware of what we discuss when we talk about conscious coordination of actions. We can ask the person to change the coordination of actions. From that very simple starting point, we are going to ask the person to say, well, do you realize that you're rotating the rib cage to sit? You're rotating with the top of the rib cage going back and the lower part of the rib cage going forward. Would it be possible to get the back, which is the lower part of the rib cage connected with the middle torso? We know that the ribs are connected with the vertebrae. So if the lowest ribs well, the tense ribs, if you want, which is connected with the tense vertebrae. If that rib is going forward, well, the tense vertebrae is going forward with it. And it's going forward relatively to, well, the top of the sternum, which is connected with the first rib. The first rib is attached to the first thoracic vertebrae. So you have a very simple bending occurring where the first thoracic is going back in space, you're arching from the top, and you're arching from the sacrum. We can conceive a coordination. Well, we can conceive the old coordination, and we could conceive the new coordination. That is what Alexander is explaining when he's talking of the application of a new coordination. There is the possibility for the person to refuse to move the middle torso forward. There is a possibility for that person to refuse to move the upper torso and the lower torso backward in this way. If the person succeeds, then the person has created a demonstration for himself that it's possible to create an application of a coordination. And so here is another example. It's the same gentleman, but a different lesson. And what do we see on this lesson? Well, we see that the pupil has already started to organize the mechanism of the torso very much more consciously than before, because this is not the shape that you would see a beginner have. But there is something that is attracting our gaze. It's the fact that the person is leaning back now at the junction between the middle torso and the upper torso. It appears that by the effort of going back with the middle torso, we are requesting for the person to go back with the lower rib cage. We're asking the person, well, we have an instruction. The old instruction was back, but I think the instruction that is much more clear is to locate the tense rib. I call it the lowest ribs on the side of the torso because that's exactly its definition. And the person has been able to locate, touching the side of the torso, find out where that rib is, and start to, well, create antagonistic movements. For example, in this image, we see that the person is requested to move the elbow. In fact, it's moved the whole upper part of the arm, from the upper part of the arm to the elbow, along a rectilinear direction that is given by the ruler that you see applied on the front of the upper arm. We ask the person to perform that type of gesture with the arm, and it's not a specific coordination because the intent, and it's clear for the pupil. It's not for the pupil to discover this. It's every intent is explicitly defined during the lesson. I make the person consider that when the shoulders blades are widening at the back, away from the spine, the tension between, well, all the fascia and muscle that are connecting, well, the shoulder blade with the thoracic spine is going to create a mechanical action leading the thoracic spine forward. We want the upper torso to go forward. I'm not asking the person to go forward with the upper torso. I'm asking the person to go and direct the tip of the elbow forward, outward, and slightly downward, as explained in Hands on the Back of a Chair by Alexander in his second book. It's obviously indicated to the person that the person is going to have to move the torso, rotating around the sitting bones. That is what the red circle is showing. And we have already, well, established by looking at videos and making contact with the different bony parts that what we call lumbar 3, the third thoracic vertebrae process, which is the middle of the lumbar region, is set backward when the person is sitting relatively to the lower sacrum. The person has identified these spots and has a clear geometrical representation of what we see on video and that the person is not feeling when sitting. The person on that picture, if you want, is sitting in his best sitting position. That's how he sits. That's how he sits when wanting to be upright. If he was at a table of leaders, that's how he would sit. And we start to, well, discuss and question this best sitting position. And we say, this is not a best sitting position. Yes, it's clear that when the middle torso is going back, the upper torso is going back as well. This is not the coordination where the coordination we intend is based on a principle we call antagonistic action. There should be an antagonistic action between the lowest ribs going back and the upper ribs going forward. In this image, it is not happening. We see it because we see that when the lower rib cage is going back, we see that the upper rib cage is going back with it, hence the inclination of that line, hence the fact that the lumbar 3 spot is further back than, of course, the lower sacrum. And these are measurements that the person can make by himself. He doesn't need my hand or a specialist person that can feel extraordinary thing to discover it. The person is absolutely able, well, to place, for example, a ruler against the back and look on the video to see what is the direction of the upper torso relatively to the middle torso. But during the lesson, I am providing, these instruction, these descriptionary sentence where I say, well, the upper torso is moving backward with the middle torso. Do we want that? Is it a way to expand the back? No, it's not. So we don't want it. So the person can start to, well, ponder on these ideas and start to see whether it could make his thinking correspond more with his actions as seen on a video recording. And so you will see that, you see there is a little change. The person is starting to move. Can you see that? And we see that, of course, the upper torso is starting to move forward very slightly, and the middle torso is staying back. And the person continues, and there are unwanted movements. You will see that there is a part of the coordination that is correct. So from the first image, when I move to the second and to the third, we see, yes, that the upper torso is coming forward. Yet, suddenly we see that when the person wants to go forward with the elbows, suddenly the shoulders are seen to be lifted, and the shoulders are lifting and the chin is going down. That we see that there is a marked shortening between the chin, the larynx, and the sternum. That is quite interesting. And at first, the person may believe that, well, that's it. That's how it works when we are directing the upper part of the arm. What happens is that, of course, we get a part of the result that we want, but there is a massive shortening at the top. And the person will think, well, I should not, therefore, try and create a conscious coordination, because when I'm starting to reorganize the movement between the upper torso and middle torso, well, there are other things that are going on and that are going wrong. So cultivating a new coordination immediately tends to trigger other movements that we don't want to see. It's absolutely obvious. So for that reason, I've heard many Alexander teachers say that the student should not try to coordinate his actions. Because while he's coordinating one part, of course, on the other side, there are the movements that we don't want to see that are going to be triggered. And so therefore, when trying to learn to readjust himself, the person is cultivating other wrong habits. That is partially true. Yes, when the person is trying to create the new coordination, we see that there are other movements that are appearing that are not the one we want. It's absolutely obvious. Yet, it's not the end of the training. It's just the start. At that moment, it's possible to request to the pupil to notice what are the coordination of movements that are still active behind the conscious coordination. The conscious coordination is just a new color you're setting against the wall, but the ball is still there, and the bumps and so it's necessary when the person is starting, well, to continue to video the sessions and to continue to see what's happening. And then we can make a new experiment where we request the pupil. As you see, it's the same experiment, but without the rulers this time. And I'm asking the person to make sure that when he's organizing the movement of the elbow in order to widen the upper part of the arm, widen the back, and get the shoulders forward and downward, we request that he oppose the movement of the chin to the movement of the elbow. And therefore, you will see that in fact, when the pupil was starting to come forward, well, it was obviously lengthening the back, but it was crunching the front down. It's possible to ask the person to take into account these things. And so the pupil is building up a more complex representation of the coordination of actions or coordination of movements that is requested in order to lengthen and widen the back, the end that we are looking for, so that the head can be seen to be forward and upward, so that the neck is getting freer and freer. That's the point. So going back to what Alexander was saying, I think I have to go back. The harmful condition that Alexander is talking about will not be cultivated if the specific coordination is brought about by means of an indirect process involving primarily the general coordination as a psychophysical organism, an integrated condition in which all the factors continue to make for satisfactory psychomechanical use. All the factors are not solved at this step in the procedures. It's obvious. So we need further study, further decomposition of movements. Why is it that when the person is starting to rotate the chest, why is it that the chin is always collapsing forward? It's a very interesting question. We must find an answer. And so if you start asking these kind of questions, well, you will get answers. You will find answers. That's what I wanted to say. And so in this presentation, we see something fairly static, but I've prepared another representation. Once again, you see, I'm starting to realize that now we see that the pupil is much more able to lengthen the chin and to get the larynx very far back and down. So there is now this lengthening at the front of the torso that is happening. But in sitting, there is still this inclined sternum at the front. And it's always possible to see that the old pattern with the rib cage rotated, the top of the rib cage backward and the lower part rib cage forward is still active, and the back is still shortened in sitting. So I asked the person to sit astride, to sit with the torso facing the back of the chair. And I will request the person to start pulling the tip of the elbow away from the torso, outward, forward, and down, and press against the front of the chair. Of course, the front of the chair is sufficiently robust for not, moving. And so what's going to happen is that the person is going to get an antagonistic reaction from his push to the chair. If you push onto something that cannot move, you are pushed back. But when you're pushed back, you will suddenly discover that it's possible to select which parts of the structure you want to move back. When you're pushed back by the back of the chair, you can decide not to go back with the shoulders. You can decide to go back with the torso. And I'm requesting the person, of course, to go back with the lower part of the rib cage. So you get a second image. And you see that this time, when the person is readjusting, the person is not collapsing the chin. The chin is still very, very long. This is a very, very good indicator that the person is starting to lengthen the tongue root, lengthen the digastric muscle, and start to wear the larynx very further away from the mouth. So instead of being in the swallowing activity, closing the airways, the person is starting to be much more in a breathing, opening of the airways. Yeah, the tongue is lengthening. And so we see that it's possible to expand one's knowledge about the different actions and their outcome. It's what Alexander called the analysis of use. So the student is starting to analyze use, analyze which movements are in fact necessary and that we want to promote, and which movements are absolutely contrary to what we want to obtain. And so we see that in sitting, it's possible for the person to get a much better understanding, conception, and application of the coordination. That I am not, as the person playing the teacher here, readjusting that person. I am just asking that person to readjust the different movements the person is seen to perform when, for example, sitting and leaning or sitting and standing. Because at the moment, I'm showing only static experiments, but there are also dynamic experiments. Look, in this image, it's the same session. We see that I've requested the person to lean forward, and we are starting to, in fact, analyze what are the movements the person is used to perform coordinately when going to monkey. Monkey means that you are going off the chair and starting what you would like to say is the standing gesture, going from sitting to standing. And we want to see what's happening. So we see that the tendency is still present, where the chin is going to collapse downward, where the abdomen is a bit too far forward. And it's possible to represent that. We see that as the pupil is going slightly higher, it's even more visible. The person has a tendency to want to stand with the shoulders. The person wants to become erect. So it's possible to become erect by pulling the shoulders back and pulling the abdomen forward. As a result, you will get the habitual standing position. That is why even when a pupil has learned to stand with the new coordination of movements, it's just necessary to ask the person to sit and stand once more to see that immediately the standing posture that results is much more the all standing gesture, the all standing posture, and not the new one, because the person is used to performing the movements, and the movements are the cause of the posture. So it's possible then, when we analyze in this way, to say, well, fine, you're more and more capable of keeping the lower sternum. There is a grid line, you see, and we want to keep the lower sternum on the very front of the ankle. It's a direction of action that is very, poised, because there is as much momentum at the back of the ankle than at the front of the ankle. So the pupil is starting to organize his action not by what he feels, but by, in fact, ordering movement in a created space. Of course, the vertical of the ankle that we see represented does not exist. It's just something that I place onto an image. So the pupil has to conceive this orientation in order to maintain poise. And so the person is more and more capable of doing so, but the old habits are still there. There is a slight tendency to shorten the back, but there is certainly a very strong tendency of pulling the shoulder. And if you pull the shoulders back, you pull the upper thoracic back, so the neck is back. So the head, again, even in leaning forward, it's possible to see that what is more forward? Well, it's the abdomen, it's the belly. The belly is very far forward, the head is very far backward. That person is wearing the head back. The head is not forward and up at all. It's the abdomen that is forward. So it's possible for that person to start. You will see very small change, but it's this very small change that we want to see. You will start to see that the person is starting to respond to commands of antagonistic movements. The person is starting, as you see, to feel the back. You see that instead of having all these creases, very strong creases on the t-shirt, you will see that there is a possibility and a tendency to get the back, even in the leaning position. Well, it's not, of course, very visible at the moment, but these little details are all we need for the person to understand what we mean by there is not a correct position, but there is a good direction. This is the good direction. We start to see the antagonism. For the moment, the antagonism of the upper torso going forward against the middle torso is not affecting the head. The head person is still in the old habit of pulling the head back, but this is something to work with, is something to elaborate, to discuss. And this is not the end, this is the start of the work. So we are working on like a construction site. There are many things you need to build in order to start erecting, the building. And at some moment, what you've constructed in order to support the lower part of your job, of your work, has to be, wiped away, has to be destructed. Very often in the technique of construction of a conscious coordination, you have to abandon something that was necessary at first, and you have to, expand your understanding and understand that it's as necessary to construct new coordination, yes, as to destruct the old ones that were necessary at some time and are not anymore. And that is something Alexander discussed. He's saying, however expert the teacher may be, the pupil does not possess the psychophysical equipment which would enable him to take adequate advantage of the instructions given to him. His first attempt to carry these out will reveal defects, and the subsequent attempts new defects. Each request from his teacher to do something and each injunction not to do something else means a building up of a series of specific psychophysical acts toward the given end. I wanted to take that sentence or that little paragraph at the end of this presentation of the conscious coordination to show that sometimes Alexander is spitting in the soup, really. Because, of course, what he says is correct. At first, the pupil does not possess the psychophysical equipment which would enable him to take adequate advantage of the instruction given to him. Because the pupil is unaware of his own action. He's unaware of his own coordination of his actions. Well, that is true unless he finds a teacher that can show what are the outcome of the stimulus of receiving instructions. Of course, there are the attempt to carry out instruction will reveal defects. That's exactly what we want. We want the instructions to be carried out and we want to spot with defects, because when you start to spot defects, it's when you can start to conceive in a different way and rework. It's only when the pupil starts to see defects, if you make it as if you're getting all the defects away, and so the pupil is suddenly free of defects, fantastic. What has the pupil learned? Well, nothing. Well, he's learned that you are a special individual and you can bring some sort of peace, momentary peace to him. But will that change any of the habits? Not at all, ever. I've seen so many Alexander teachers that have been re-educated for years and years and years, and without any knowledge of what were the defects. The defects were not revealed. So I really do think that our function is to reveal defects. And when we are discussing psychophysical equipment, there is something. It's that we need to show our students that defects are something we like working with. It's not like, the other day, I had a new student, a very elderly lady that had many, many lessons with first generation teachers. And during her first lesson, she kept repeating one sentence. Oh, yes, I'm doing everything wrong. And she kept, so after a while, I said, why are you saying you must be doing everything wrong? What do you mean by everything wrong? And she said, well, it's what Margaret Goldie kept telling me. And I said, yes, but I'm interested in you explaining a little bit to me, because, I'm a new teacher. I need to have what are the wrong thing you were doing that she kept commenting upon? And she said, well, the whole thing wrong. And I said, but can you be more specific? Can you point to different things that she would? No, she didn't say. I was just doing things wrong. That's all. For me, this is not learning. She hasn't learned anything. It's nice to know that you're doing everything wrong. Yes, but you cannot work with it. In order to work with something, you must know that, for example, you're shortening the tongue and pulling the chin when you're engaging the movement of the upper torso. That is something you can work with. That is something you have learned that you didn't know you were doing, but now you know that you're doing it, and you know that you may not want to do it, and that the result should be that you should stretch that link between the head and the torso. Otherwise, you haven't learned anything. So when we say psychophysical equipment, there is a lot in my work where I am, just explaining to people that we have to work with defects. We want to reveal defects. The more we reveal defects, the better. And we want to be very clear about the description, the explicit description of the defects. And we want also to relate the defects, not only saying, well, this is a defect. Well, of course, this is easy. No, we want to try and ascertain what are the causes, what are the different movements that are provoking the defects, and what sort of movement could lead to, bypassing the defects. That is really something the pupil wants to learn. So each request from the teacher to do something, each injunction not to do something else. Listen to what Alexander is saying. He says that an injunction not to do something can mean a series of building of a series of specific psychophysical acts. Is that not the meanings of the means whereby procedure? In my book, it is. Well, the way Alexander presents it here, it seems like it's the wrong way. I do think this is the correct way. This is the basis of the way I teach. I will ask the person to start to realize that there are movements. And so when the person discovers that he's protruding the abdomen, pulling the shoulder blades backward, Well, suddenly we create a situation where it's absolutely clear that the person is requested to reorganize the different movements. The reorganization or the readjustment, we don't want the person to readjust anything like a position. We want the person to understand that we are discussing a coordination of actions. And we want to stress the fact that despite new defects being promoted by the coordination, this is absolutely logical. This is absolutely, well, expected. And it is the way to work forward. The coordination of a complex core system like the anatomical structure is not a simple thing where if you're aware of the now, everything is going to come out fine. Certainly not. It's something you must explore. So this is just the start of a series about coordinations of movements, because I think we need to stress more and more, and again, the importance of realizing what it is to consciously control and consciously direct the coordination of the anatomical structure. Any
Excellent.
question?
On the subject of defects, and that we want to reveal defects because they're useful. So, and a lot of people find this a problem because they don't want to be making mistakes and they're trying to get it right. A useful analogy would be, well, I was speaking with a musician the other day, and he was telling me the difference between a classical pianist and a jazz pianist. And the classical pianist, it's all about getting it right technically, and you can't make mistakes. But a jazz pianist, it's about the mistakes. So they would make the making mistake is then what they use to be more creative. It's not a problem. That's the tool they use to perform their art. So for people who have a problem making mistakes, that's maybe a way to think about it. That's what's allowing you to be more creative or to get more conscious coordination over yourself.
Yeah, we gain a lot from developing the psychophysical equipment to accept defects and have fun with defects, have fun with it, and work with it and describe them very, very closely, and analyzing how maybe making different experiments, maybe sometimes crazy ones, just to see if we can reproduce the defects with different movements. Because if you see that with different movements coordinated together, different conscious movement, then you do not get that defect, but some other defect, then you can start reasoning out things and say, wow, wait a second. These kinds of movements coordinated together lead to one defect, but this other series leads to a different defect, which means that there is a different defect, certainly, but the one that I was discussing in the first place has disappeared. Wow, so I can make defects disappear. There are always going to be very unclear outcomes. Well, the concept of the coordination of the whole is just a myth. It's just very clearly nobody can get it. Yeah, even Alexander, I've got plenty on films or on photographs, just little details where I say, well, this is absolutely wrong. Why is he coordinating this movement? Well, if I look at the whole, I can say, well, his presence is clearly an indication of lengthening and widening of the neck, rear, head, forward and up of the torso, that's for sure. But there are little things. And I've been at it for nearly 26 years now. And well, I'm still full of defects. The general coordination is just, well, the horizon. Walk toward the horizon. When you arrive, you tell me. Yeah, it's like, it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, but there is an order of magnitude. Yeah, there are absolute defects. The one that are so obvious that it's absolutely necessary is the shortened back, the protruding abdomens, the unduly lifted front part of the chest, the shortening of the spine. Well, most people that nowadays are incapable of organizing the torso to get some sort of support. So it's different. It's not going toward the horizon, you know, and expecting to arrive there. But it's more like taking a stance and say, well, I want to take control of this coordination. That's it. I want a basic athletic sitting, a basic athletic standing. I call athletic. Maybe it's the wrong word, because for me, athletics means, well, a champion of movements. You have to think movements, you have to evaluate movements, and you have to decide movements. So that's what I call athletic sitting, and that's what I teach. I teach athletic sitting and standing, and that is where people start to become capable of understanding the movement they are accepting and the movement they are refusing.
Okay, thanks, Jeando.
You're welcome.
Everyone watching the video, if you want to book a lesson with Jeando, you'll find his email address and links to his website and his Facebook underneath. And we'll see everyone in the next video. Thanks, Jeando.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.